honestly, like, it wasn't even, I was praying for it more for Caitee than I was for myself, because I saw her in the midst of her struggle, just like persevering. And I had never seen someone be so consistent in prayer and just asking, because she knew that it was something that God had promised her. And, it really, honestly, I feel like my faith was strengthened because of Caitee's. And, I'm sitting here today with a lot more faith than I had a few years ago.
I'm Caitee.
And I'm Casey.
We were married in 2015 and married young, 19 and 23. And it was always on my heart to be a mom one day. I've always wanted that from the time I was a little girl. But, since we were married young, we waited a while to start trying to have a baby. So in 2020, it was the fall of 2020, we had decided that we were going to start trying to conceive. And in my mind, I thought that it would be something that we would make that decision and it would happen immediately or soon. And it didn't. And it was month after month after month of trying and hoping and praying for a baby. And we just could not figure out what was going on and why we couldn't conceive. So I started seeing my OB, seeing various other doctors, and there were no answers. I seemed healthy, and we didn't really know what was going on. So through that journey of just not knowing why, we eventually were referred to a fertility specialist to try and figure out what was going on. And so through that, there was a lot of testing, and I had a procedure done to see what was kind of going on, lots of blood work and ultrasounds. And I eventually was diagnosed with PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and is basically a insulin resistance issue in my body, which started to explain some symptoms that I was experiencing, and just some things that were going on. But kind of rewinding through that whole journey from 2020, wanting to conceive, up to 2022, was the spring of 2022, that we decided to see the fertility specialist. It was really, really hard because in my mind, being a mom was something that I always dreamed of, and I thought that it would happen. And I started to question if it ever would.
And I can just remember, as a husband, my first reaction is to want to fix everything, and step in. And if there's a problem, I want to fix it. And I want to have the answer. I want to have the solution. And here we were together as a couple, and there was a problem that I couldn't fix. And I tried everything I could just to be there for Caitee. But it just didn't ever feel like enough for me. I felt like being there, like there had to be something else I could do. And it was in those moments of just not knowing what to do that God really spoke to me and said, like, Casey, you need to stop trying to fix this. The only thing you can do is surrender this to me and, wait. And a lot of times that waiting is really tough, because we want to see things done in our time. And, we had been married for, quite a while, and our time was now. We were ready to have a child. We wanted this to happen. But here we were in the midst of this trial, waiting and trying our best to daily surrender this situation to God. And, he really met us in that waiting. He softened my heart. Honestly, when we first got married, I wasn't even sure I wanted children. But it wasn't until I got to see Caitee's heart, this promise that she knew that God made to her, that she was meant to be a mother. And so God began to soften my heart as we walked this journey. It became clear to me that fatherhood was something that I was meant for as well. As we continue to walk, we continue to see God's faithfulness through all of it.
Yeah, definitely. And just through that time, it was one of those things that it was like month after month, I would be taking pregnancy test and it was negative, and pregnancy test and pregnancy test after pregnancy test, countless tests. And it was so discouraging because I felt like my focus was on what I wanted so badly. And through that time, at that point, 2 years-ish of waiting, finally, and I don't know what the shift was exactly, but God really just placed into my heart that I needed to surrender and I needed to be open about my struggle. It was something that I was holding on to so tightly. And yes, the people close to us knew that we wanted to have a baby, but my walls were up as far as how bad it hurt and how bad the struggle, or how hard the struggle was. And so I just consistently felt like God was asking me to just surrender to him and like really lean in and be honest about this. And so during that season, we were leading a life group for several semesters where it was really the same group of people in similar seasons. And it was like this two parallels, because on one end, there were people in this life group that were having babies, that were just deciding that they wanted to have a baby and conceived immediately. Meanwhile, while we were struggling so hard, and although like we were so happy for them and celebrated with them, there was this piece of wanting that too, wanting it so badly and not having it. And so God just really challenged me specifically to just really be open about my struggle and real about it. And so with these people, we just started sharing, and we were leading this group and we were sharing our struggle. And that was really hard. But from the moment of surrendering and constantly daily surrendering it, because there was never some mountaintop moment of surrendering it, it was a daily thing. And then being vulnerable, God just really met me and met us in our marriage, because it was something that we couldn't control. And looking back on it, it just reminds me of the importance of and the value of just being honest with people, because that's what binds community and builds community. And so we would literally pour our hearts out to these people, and I would be sitting on our living room floor sobbing in the midst of joyous things like other babies being born or other struggles going on too. And we would just have times of literally just praying for each other, because there was other people going through things too. And it would look like sometimes not even sticking to our curriculum, but literally just laying hands on each other and praying. And it was so powerful because the Holy Spirit just really just met us in our community in that season. And those people like really, really rallied around us. And it wasn't even that they had the right words to say. It was just that they were there and accepting, and then would literally take it on themselves to be sending us text messages of encouragement or praying for us. And kind of through that season of waiting, of struggling, of not having answers, and eventually getting the answer of my diagnosis of PCOS, I felt the Lord prompting me through someone else that was struggling with the same exact issue, infertility. They challenged me to ask the Lord for confirmation that I can ask him to confirm in me, like this promise that I felt, that I just knew in my heart that I was going to be a mom. And so this person asked me to just ask the Lord to confirm, to keep confirming. And so I started doing that, and I just would journal constantly, or I started making an ongoing note in my phone of just asking God to speak to me. And it was never an audible thing. It was often through other people, or through scripture, or just like a thought that would come to my mind that wasn't mine, but it was from the Lord. And it would just be things like, I'm going to restore this. I'm going to make this new. I'm going to use your story. I see you. And so I kept seeing those things and hearing those things constantly. And I do remember someone in our life group specifically that prayed over me. I remember this person saying, like, I feel like God's telling you, Caitee, that you need to look to him, and that you need to put your eyes on him, because you're looking down and you're not looking up. And when I think about that, I think about how for so long my focus was on the baby that I wanted, instead of the person of my faith, Jesus. I was focused on this object. And so again, like, God just really challenged me to surrender repeatedly, over and over and over and over again. And through that, like, I've never felt nearer to God, even though I was struggling so much on a daily basis. I just felt so near to him. Like, his comfort was so clear. And I continuously just felt this promise in my heart that, like, he was going to provide. And I started praying and journaling constantly, this kind of referring back to a passage in Mark chapter 9, where this man comes to Jesus and asks him to heal his son. And he says something along the lines of, like, if you can. And Jesus says, like, something along the lines of that anything's possible if you believe. And the father says, I believe, but help my unbelief. And so daily, my prayer would be like, Jesus, I'm believing for this. I know you've promised it to me, but I have unbelief in my heart. So just help me. Help my unbelief. And through that daily surrender, my faith was building, and people in our life group, or even just in the church, again, would still continuously, like, be sending or speaking encouragements. And eventually it started being tied to a gender, that we were going to have a boy. And, like, people would say, like, your son, or him, or he. And I just, like, knew in my heart that we were going to have a boy. And again, at this time, I was not pregnant. And after I had received my diagnosis of PCOS, it was confusing and a lot of learning. And I started to go for regular blood work and regular ultrasounds to again see what was going on. I was put on a special diet and medication, and just tried to make some like basic lifestyle changes that our specialist had recommended. And it still just felt like an eternity because I was doing all these things and I was struggling through it. And even anything invasive, medically speaking, is really, really difficult for me. And so just even going through all of this was so outside of my comfort zone because it was very, very invasive. And so they were asking me, the doctors kind of were like, okay, we want to make these changes with diet, medication, and just some other things medically, and kind of give a waiting point. And we'll check in again. We'll recheck your blood work. We'll recheck some levels to see what's going on. And we'll see, if you're producing healthy eggs, basically. And so by, I believe it was December 2022, I had gotten some more blood work, and they had said like, okay, things are looking so much better. Your PCOS is more under control. Your insulin levels, the way your body's processing glucose looks better. And, we're recommending that we kind of, go full-fledged and start trying to conceive with medication and some monitoring. And through that. So we started that in January 2023 when we kind of got the green light for that my body was in a better place. And that was right around the time of the prayer and fasting season at church. And going back a year to January 2022, I can remember specifically being here in Cherry Hill during a worship night. And we had come to the front for prayer. And specifically, we were asking, of course, for God's favor in conceiving a baby. And one of the person that prayed over us had talked about how they were praying that this time next year that we would have a baby. And so again, back to January 2023, it was prayer and fasting again, and we were still praying for the same thing, still longing for it. And I wasn't pregnant. And I just felt like in that time, like, God, like, you've been speaking to me throughout this past year. Like, we have been waiting for so long. And I don't feel seen. Even though he was seeing me, I don't feel seen. And so at that point, little did I know that we would conceive. Just literally a couple weeks after that point, after that 1 year anniversary of what felt like kind of a turning point, and like God is going to answer this prayer. And at this point, I had really kind of stopped taking pregnancy tests. And I was just like, well, when I'm pregnant, I'll know that I'm pregnant. And even though in the past I had taken countless pregnancy tests. And at this point, I was going to the fertility clinic multiple times a week. I mean, there were some weeks where I was there 3 mornings, and I would go before I had to work or whatever and get blood work, ultrasounds, all the things. And I had gone in that morning in March. It was March 1st, 2023. It was the second cycle that we had been on, or I had been on a medication called letrozole that was going to help me ovulate. And I was being closely monitored after kind of getting things medically with my body in order before that point. So March 1st, 2023, I went in for blood work. And one of the things that they were checking was my levels for pregnancy, along with other things. And I just always felt like, I had a lot of these appointments. I don't want to get my hopes up. I hadn't taken a pregnancy test. And I came home. I wasn't working that day. I was by myself at the house. And I remember eating lunch, and I had an app that kind of had my medical records on it. And so I was like, oh, I'll see if my blood work got put in, if things are looking good. And I started looking at my levels for the pregnancy hormone, and the numbers were so high. And I just remember looking at that and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, is this actually, I don't want to get my hopes up. And so immediately I, go to Dr. Google, and I'm like, what are the levels of this? Am I pregnant? And after my research, I was like, I think I might be, I don't know. And so literally minutes later, I had gotten a call from the fertility office, and they were like, Caitee, congratulations, you are pregnant. And I literally just completely went blank and was just in total shock. And literally in my kitchen just fell to my knees and just cried to God, because he had seen me and my prayer was answered. And it was just this overwhelming feeling of unbelief of this miracle, because we didn't know if it was going to happen. And throughout our whole journey, it was just a constant surrender and a constant need to remember God's love and God's grace throughout all of it. And after that moment, I just felt like, oh my goodness, these stories that I've been clinging to in the Bible of Hannah praying for a son, and Sarah and Abraham not being able to conceive for so long, or Elizabeth having the miracle of John the Baptist. I kept feeling like I'm one of these women. I have this miracle baby. And I just knew immediately that it was going to be a boy because of the things that were spoken over us and what I had prayed for. It was just that fulfillment of that promise. And then because I was more high risk because of the difficulty getting pregnant, we received multiple ultrasounds. I was still going to the fertility clinic very often. They were checking my progesterone and other levels, checking in on, via ultrasound. And it was just amazing, because even at that first ultrasound, I remember just seeing this tiny little speck, this tiny little blob that just looked like a blob at the time. But just knowing that, that's our miracle. That is our miracle. That is our child that we've been waiting for and praying for.
I literally remember that first appointment where we got to see our baby boy on the monitor, and just literally just sitting at the doctor's office crying my eyes out, because I just, I couldn't believe that this thing we had prayed for so long. And honestly, it wasn't even, I was praying for it more for Caitee than I was for myself, because I saw her in the midst of her struggle, just persevering. And I had never seen someone be so consistent in prayer and just asking, because she knew that it was something that God had promised her. And, it really, honestly, I feel like my faith was strengthened because of Caitee's. And, I'm sitting here today with a lot more faith than I had a few years ago, because we've walked this journey together. And so I can just remember sitting in that ultrasound, and both of us were a wreck, just crying our eyes out because our miracle that we had prayed for was sitting on a screen in front of us, just a tiny little jelly bean with a heartbeat. And it's just a day I'll never forget.
Yeah. And what was just so cool about it was, in addition to, of course, this being a miracle, but there were other people like very close to us that also had conceived within weeks apart from us. And just to see like God's promise fulfilled of things, again, like in the past spoken to us, of people saying like, I remember even Pastor George saying to us, like, this is before we and the Probascos had even conceived, like, this is the year that God is going to do a miracle. Like, he's going to do it. And he did. And so I look back on that and think, like, if we would have gotten pregnant at a different time, there wouldn't have been these interwoven stories of miracles. And that God just knew all along that it was just exactly when it was meant to happen. And so through the pregnancy, it was just amazing to have the bonds of other people, close friends that were also going through the same exact thing, and just constantly being in awe of this miracle. And I had a journal that every week of the pregnancy, it was like a prayer prompt and scripture to like pray over your baby. And so I just like continuously would do that and just make deposits, spiritual deposits for this baby up until we were to have him. And so God has just really stirred in me, and I think us, to just surrender everything. So even up to the point of labor, it was just this constant surrender, because I felt this like worry to be induced to have him. And like, yes, I had my miracle. He wasn't in my arms yet, but I was so worried of being induced. And of course, they had to induce me. And so I went into the hospital to be induced. We went, of course, together. And I just remember feeling God's presence just so clear in that hospital room. Even though like our story of labor was really, really long and really, really hard. And there were some scary moments of just like dipping heart rates, and was having issues with my blood pressure, and they were monitoring me really closely. And at the end of the day, I had to get a C-section after what was 44 plus hours of labor. But through even that whole experience, I just knew that this was like God's promise, and that we would have a son and he would get here safely, because God had said it. And if God says it, then we can believe it. And so on November 15th, 2023, at 3:44 p.m., our little miracle Ezra was born. And it wasn't the birth that I had hoped, because I was so afraid of being induced and didn't want to have a C-section, but that's how it ended. That's how it came to be. God was just so present throughout everything, just with his hand over me and over Ezra. And we just felt God's presence throughout the entire experience. And we named him Ezra because of the meaning of his name. So we had talked for a while about what we would name him. And I had always told Caitee that I was like, I want it to mean something. Like it needs to mean something, because he's special and he is a miracle. And we can't just name him anything. And so we chose Ezra because it means help. And without God's help, ultimately, we would not have our Ezra. And his middle name is John, which means God is gracious, because he didn't have to give me this promise. He didn't have to fulfill this longing of mine, but he did. And so now, having him in our life almost 10 months later now, he's just a constant reminder of God's help and God's grace towards us and over our lives. And he is our rainbow.
Yeah, so what would you guys say to somebody in a similar situation, whether it's specifically pregnancy or just in that period of waiting, from someone that they know God has promised, whether through the Word or through the Holy Spirit working to them, and they're just waiting and not seeing it? Is there anything that you would say to that person?
I think I would first and foremost say the importance of just surrounding yourself with godly people who love you, who you don't have to be fake with. One thing that we've learned through this journey is that when you're in a life group with people, it means that you're going to have a lot of happy times together, but you're probably going to do a lot of ugly crying too. And that's part of just being real. We have been so blessed to just be surrounded by people in our lives, both in that life group and in this church, who we don't have to feel like we have to have it all together, because throughout this journey, most of the time we didn't. And that's just, we could always go to them just as we were, and they would meet us where we were. They would cry a lot of tears with us, and we just always felt so supported. And that has just been an awesome blessing to us. And just also, I would say, just now that we're on the other side of this journey, one of my prayers now is that God would keep what I'm calling my Ezra moment on the forefront of my mind. I feel like so many times, even in the last 10 months, there's been like other situations come up in our life, and we're like, well, like, God, do you see me? God, do you care? Are you here? And then I'm like, wait a minute, Casey, like 10 months ago, God just gave you the miracle that you prayed for years. Don't forget it. And so what my prayer is now moving forward is that I wouldn't be short-sighted, that I would always remember that no matter what, even if it doesn't happen in our time, God does see us. He does hear us when we call to him. He answers prayers. He gives miracles. And that's just something, as we move through our life, post this miracle, that we know that God is going to continue to show up for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think adding to that would be that just because something is hard, or if you're in the midst of suffering, whatever that looks like, that God, there's something special about what he can do. When we are at our lowest of lows, we can feel, not just feel, we can experience the nearness of God unlike any other circumstance. There's something about that is such a gift that God gives when you are in your pit of struggle. And it requires surrender, and it requires leaning in, and it requires being honest. And so I would encourage someone going through something similar to be honest with God about how you're feeling, and really listen to him, ask him to confirm what you are longing for. Ask him to speak, and listen to him. And also reiterating what Casey said, surrounding yourself with community is so important. I shared that we literally wept with these people. But on the flip side of that too, we also cried tears of joy with these people. And they are still near and dear to us. And we have a bond that is unlike any other, because they know us. They really know us and can see the miracle too. And in total transparency, like I have moments where I'm like, God, like, okay, I said before, like, I've longed to be a mom, and Ezra is our miracle. Like, can you do this again for me? And I'm just challenged to remember that whether it be another child or something else in our lives, that if God says it, he will do it. And he doesn't need us. He doesn't need us to create our own perfect timing. He doesn't need me to try and control the situation. He just needs to look my direction, and whatever he says, he does. And if he says it, it is done. And so I would just encourage someone with that, to just really lean in, and don't be afraid to walk through the struggle. Yeah.